Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining us in Ask Me Anything, an audiology student guide to clinical experiences. This is a joint event between SAA, SADA, and National NSSLHA. My name is Allison Tran. I am a first year audiology student at San Jose State University, and I am National NSSLHA's president elect. I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to the rest of the hosts for the rest of the evening.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lindy Alvarez. I'm currently the president of National SAA. I'm a dual AUD and PhD student at the University of Texas at Dallas, and I'm currently doing my externship at the Mayo Clinic in Arizona.
And then, hi everyone, my name is Andrew Setrum. I am the president of the Student Academy of Doctors of Audiology, and I recently graduated with my AUD from Pacific University in Oregon, and I completed my externship at mHealth Fairview's Clinic and Surgery Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Awesome. So tonight we'll be discussing various aspects of audiology clinical experiences, including preparing for placements, navigating preceptor relationships, and finding non-traditional opportunities. We're very fortunate to have a panel of experienced audiology students and recent graduates who have taken the time out of their busy schedules to share their insights and experiences with us. With that, I'd like to introduce you to our panel. I'll just have each panelist introduce themselves. Alexandra, why don't you start us off?
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex. I use she, her pronouns. I also recently graduated from Pacific University. I completed my externship at Virginia Mason Franciscan Health, which I will be starting there after my license goes through.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jeray Bryant. I am a recent graduate from Pacific University, and I recently finished up my externship at Mayo Clinic, Arizona, and I will soon be starting up at Oregon Clinic this October.
Hi all, my name is Allison. I'm currently a third year student at the University of Iowa, and I'm currently doing my placement at the Hearing Aid Center at the university.
And then my name is Brianna. I am a fourth year student at The Ohio State University, currently doing my externship with Johns Hopkins. Pronouns are she, her.
Hi everyone, my name is Sierra Morrow. I use she, her pronouns. I am currently attending University of Colorado Boulder, and I am a fourth year student extern at Children's Hospital, Colorado.
Hey everyone, my name is Madeline Beyer. I am a fourth year student at the City University of New York, and I am currently doing my externship at the NYU Cochlear Implant Center, and I use she, her pronouns.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here again. Our first topic that we're going to be going over is preparing for clinical placements. So at this entire event, you can go ahead and use the Q&A feature, and we'll be sure to address your questions. But to begin, I just want to start off by asking what your best piece of advice is for students entering their first year, and for also students who are starting their out placements. Alex, did you want to start us off, and then any of the other panelists can join in?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece of advice is to remember how cumulative our degree actually is. I know for myself, we had block basically classes. So it was one topic and then we move on to the next. So I kind of got in the habit of, all right, this week I'm tackling OAEs. Next week I'm tackling something else. And I would really not allow myself to keep building on top of each other. I would just focus in sections. And it showed, unfortunately. So just make sure that you're really letting yourself absorb the knowledge and then bring it with you as you keep moving forward, because it really will pay off, especially an externship.
I can add something to what Alex was saying. One thing that I still think about a lot in my current placement is that audiologists do things differently. Different preceptors will have different styles, different ways of doing things. That freaked me out a little bit at first because I was very set and like, well, I learned it that this is how you do it, and like this is the formula for the amount of masking that you put at each frequency. And it's really good to have a foundation, but be flexible because there's more than one way to go about doing things. And as long as you're, rooted in evidence-based practice and you have a reason for what you're doing, stay flexible. There's more ways to get to your final destination than you may think of at this point.
I can add to that as well. I think when you're working with so many new people and people who have so many different types of experiences, it can get very overwhelming, gaining so many pieces that you're building in your own clinical toolbox. I was always a really strong advocate for being kind to yourself during the first year or your first clinical rotation. Just because there's so many new things that you're going to be experiencing and encountering so many patients and so many preceptors, just giving yourself that grace that you are a student and this may be a first time experience for you. So being kind to yourself during the entire process is something I advocate for.
Adding on to that, I also think it's really important to figure out what works for you and maintaining a work-life balance. Because if you don't have things to look forward to outside of the class, that gets a little rough.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I think those are just really great insights for all of us to think about, and especially for me as a first year student, like these are really things that I'm going to keep in mind as I go through my academic career. Another question is just what was the most challenging part about transitioning from a student or university-based clinic to your outplacements?
I can start off with that. I think the hardest thing is honestly figuring out other people's schedules, how they like to work, and kind of incorporating that new information with what you're used to and figuring out a happy balance in between to kind of see, well, I've done it this way, I've done it that way. What do I prefer? What do I like best? But also sometimes navigating how to make that work is a little difficult in the process.
I think for me, the biggest challenge was accounting for the time difference, essentially. So in our university-based clinic, we had 2 hours for an audiogram. That's not counting preparation and or documentation. And at my current job, I have 45 minutes to do all of that, including billing as well. So really, it was just knowing that things were going to get a lot quicker, but also that I was going to get a lot quicker with it.
I think too, the growth of independence was something that was really challenging for me because I felt supported in all of my rotations, both university clinic and outpatient or outplacements. But having that growth and feeling that independence was a little shaky for me to start off with, because I really had to find the confidence in myself and have my preceptors have that confidence in me to allow me to have that growing independence with patients.
I think going off that, one thing that was hard for me at first was understanding like what were the different expectations that different preceptors had, because each preceptor expected something a little bit different. Some were more heavily towards observation and some were more heavily towards getting me involved very quickly. So I think something that I found helpful is at the beginning of outplacements to really ask how they want me to help, ask for feedback after each appointment, because then they grew to trust my skills and knew at what point my skills, maybe they needed to step in and help, or if I was comfortable taking care of something independently.
I know for me, one of the bigger challenges was just getting used to some of the administrative differences compared to my school clinic. Going from something like Counselor to Epic is a big switch, much more powerful EMR software. And then also just knowing some of the logistical things. How long does it take for you to get follow-ups? How long can you schedule people out on appointments? Things like that, so that way patients know when they can come back and what sort of the routine and timing is at your placement.
Jerry, just to follow up on that, what do you think you would have done differently to better prepare yourself for that challenge?
That's tough just because all of that is so much more specific to your individual placement. It's really hard to practice that when that's going to not have the same answer in any other place you're going to go to. What the thing I would say is I probably would have just raised that concern rather quickly, just so that way I could have gotten that information sooner and say like, hey, how long do follow-ups typically take? How long, if a patient has an emergency, does it take for them to get in? What doctor are they going to if we find something, central findings on the vestibular testing? Who are they going to see? Because they're asking me that and I don't know the answer already.
I see. Thank you so much. We had a question from the Q&A. What strategies can students who maybe seniors and undergrad start now to aid in learning in terms of retaining things cumulatively? I know, Alex, you spoke a little bit about this earlier, but yeah.
I would say repetition. I know that's like not what everybody wants to hear, but that's how I study. I like to read notes on end until I remember the next word of, the sentence. So we had didactic exams, which were really helpful in kind of aiding in that push to study previous things. But if you don't have those, I think, reading all of the semester notes before winter break and then the following semester kind of idea, I think that would be really helpful. And I wish I would have done that because I was like, break, which is, what you want because you need it for your mental health, but also remember that in the next few weeks, you'll be going back.
To add to that, if your university or your program offers any type of virtual learning, I'm drawing a blank on the word right now, but if you're able to practice, audiograms on your computer or masking on your computer, I'm sure there are resources out there that I was using even as a first-year student if I wasn't able to get into my university clinic and practice on my friends in the program. SADA, yes, someone put SADA in the chat. That was definitely a program that I used as a first year, and it was extremely helpful during breaks if I had just a little bit of time where I wanted to add a little bit more to my skill and my practice.
I know for me, one of the primary tools I had to be able to retain information was save all my class notes in a cloud. So that way I would always be able to re-pull it, even if I'm at a different workstation. And just make sure that everything is always re-accessible and held in a way that is saved and you can always go back to it.
I still will go back into my notes, even as like in my fourth year, go back, pull those notes from like my first year to be able to reference them. But also, as somebody who was in undergrad, kind of as COVID was starting, I didn't get a lot of time with like hands-on in-person experience. And I think I would have done a little bit better had I done more observation early on to be able to understand and see the reasoning behind what I'm doing.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important for us to kind of continue going back into all the things that we learned to build upon what we're doing now. Another question that came up was how do we find work-life balance between school and placements and just our everyday life? I think a lot can come up in outplacements, but how do you maintain good work-life balance? Allison, do you want to start us off?
So I feel like something that I did was try to find something that could be like my time. So something that I enjoyed doing that was a distraction from school and clinic and everything like that. So for me, it was coaching Girls on the Run. It was just something I enjoyed doing. So I would encourage you to find something that makes you happy and allows you to take that step back from school and school responsibilities.
I'll add to that. I think adding in time in your calendar to indicate that you are going to take time for yourself, whether if it's an hour or two between classes to grab lunch or to schedule a brunch with your friends, just something that's you can see. So even if it's in your head, you might say, oh, I have other things I need to do, but to prioritize it and actually put it on a calendar was helpful for me to be like, okay, I'm going to set time aside from school and clinic to prioritize my life outside of these things.
One thing that was, looking back, it feels a little funny, but as I got started with my fourth year, I'm at a major medical center, and the cochlear implant center at NYU is closed on Christmas Day and I think New Year's Day and like the 4th of July, but I mean, that's it, and I was like really, really nervous to ask for a couple days off around Christmas for some reason, like to go see my family. And I think I just had to remind myself in the first couple months, like, you're still a person, like they don't own your life here. And it sounds very silly, but I've always struggled with work-life balance. My audiology is actually a second career for me, and my first career there was no work-life balance at all. I was in the music industry, and so it was very challenging. It's always been hard for me to find that. But so I feel like just really, as basic as it sounds, just reminding yourself constantly, like, yeah, there's some inherent hierarchy to all this, but you're still a person, and your boundaries and basic needs must be met. So maybe I'm just like coaching myself through this here in front of us all right now.
I think the self-coaching is super valid, because even in my externship year, I had to remember that nothing was that serious and that I could go to bed, which it seems so, basic, but I had to remember this assignment can wait. I don't know. Thinking about my, hearing aid recheck that I maybe did not ace is not going to benefit me at 9:30 at night. So that helps.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Another question that we had was, how do you find flow with your patients? Brianna, did you want to start us off?
I feel like that's kind of one of those ones where I personally take it kind of patient by patient, because what works for one person is not going to work necessarily on another. And so if you have somebody who's very joking, has a sarcastic kind of demeanor to them, who versus I'm very strict, I'm very stern, I don't want to be here, just cut to the chase, how you approach that's going to be a little bit different, and just being able to figure out how to read the room.
I would say reading the room, but also being able to take feedback about, your flow is super important. My first internship, my preceptor was very, very casual, and I didn't realize how much I carried that into my own style into the beginning of my externship when I started seeing patients, on my own. And I had my supervisor pull me aside and say, we're all kind of noticing that you're a little bit too relaxed. So just be willing to, make changes to your style, because that wasn't my style. I was just copying my first preceptor style. So just stay true to who you are, but also know that this is, a healthcare profession. So also aligning with those ideals.
Okay. Another question from the Q&A was, what were your interview experiences like? And is there anything you wish you would have done differently? Dre, did you want to start us off?
So I had interviews at quite a number of places. I think that the interview experiences themselves, they're not, I think we worry often about like, okay, what narrow audiology question are they going to ask me? Or what are they going to ask me what the proper, frequency is for tone bursts on vents or something like are you going to ask a really narrow question? And usually that's not the case. What I would say is just like brush up on like your diagnostics and making sure you have a good background of like how to do hearing tests and things like that. But don't worry too much about like, oh, are they going to ask me something super narrow and then I'm going to be disqualified because I gave a bad answer. I think that a lot of that worry makes people tight in interviews. And I think knowing that, hey, the questions usually aren't that crazy is really helpful to be loose and be more relaxed and come across a little better.
I actually got an interview question wrong. Jure and I interviewed for the same place, and she asked me a question, and I so confidently answered it wrong, and then left a really painful pause after. So it's all about the, your personality that you offer to it. They're not going to cut you off if you answer a question wrong, because that's where I got my externship. So take a breath. It'll be okay.
I think also in these interviews, remember that people want to know about you. They're not just going to ask audiology questions. They want to know about you, and definitely think about what is interesting about yourself or your story, and bring that to the picture. What sets you apart? One of my favorite questions that I got in one of my fourth year interviews was, what's something you're really proud of that has nothing to do with audiology? And I thought that was such an awesome question. So yeah, definitely. And I say this especially if anyone on here is like not a straight out of undergrad into AUD program student. Like, I know it's, if you're someone who's like had a gap in time in between undergrad and the AUD, or it took you a while to figure out what path you were on, lean into that. I was really nervous that would, going into the AUD program, that would be to my disadvantage. And I think it's exactly the opposite. It's been to, it's been, I don't want to say it's necessarily helped, but I think it's really, given me a lot of perspective and a lot of things to talk about in interviews, honestly.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing. Another question that we had come in the chat was, what are some things that would help you with being more culturally competent and sensitive with patients for best practice? Sarah, did you have anything to add for that?
That's a really good question. I think coming into your appointments and your patients with as limited biases as possible. And I actually just got out of a training with this, and it really opened my eyes to the implicit bias that not only I hold, but the other providers that I work with hold. And coming into that room and meeting the patient where they are and helping them with their needs is something that has helped me I worded that wrong. When I go into the appointment, I try to remove those implicit biases as best as possible. So that way I can serve the patient where they are and meet them meet their needs.
I think follow up to that, how do you think it's best to identify our own implicit biases?
That's another good question. And if anyone wants to follow up, please feel free. I think recognizing personally the own implicit biases that I have has been very helpful. And like I said, I just got out of a training of it, that we all do have implicit biases, and recognizing those before we're encountering the patients that we are providing care for. So that way we, kind of like the question was asked, so that way we're offering the best patient care as we possibly can, because we come into this field to want to help people and to want to make the best decisions and medical decisions for them as possible. But we need to remove those biases. And doing that, it takes work and it takes practice.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing about that. I definitely think that's really important for us to identify and address, again, to provide the best practices and the best care for our patients and our clients. I think for our last question on this subject, what is something you wish you did more or did better to prepare you for clinical placements? Allison, did you want to start us off?
Sure. So something that I did was reviewing a lot of my class notes, especially for like hearing aids, and just general diagnostic protocols. I wish I had maybe dove into that a little bit more, especially for some of the specific things like interpreting DPOAEs and things like that. But really, I think just making sure that you at least know the protocols and you'll learn all the specifics when you get to the placement, but just having a general understanding.
My university had a clinic that we could use pretty much at any time. In hindsight, I wish I would have practiced on friends, literally anybody. I think that would have set me up to be a lot more confident going into internships and externship. I just did not take advantage of all that the school clinic had to offer because I was tired or I was doing homework or things like that. But I think that would have been more beneficial to me.
And it looks like we have a question in the Q&A. So could you all elaborate a bit more on how the externship process works for students who haven't gone through it yet? So things like choosing where to apply, application process, and whether you had assistance from your program or professors. So really, anyone who's gone through this process, go ahead and jump in.
I can start. So our program, we started the application process kind of on our own time. However, applications were due sometime in mid-August. So putting together our letter of intent and gaining letters of recommendation for specific sites, depending on how many letters of recommendation they wanted for their extern. That was all kind of started for me in the summer. And then I also worked and built upon my resume, which I had a lot of help from career services at my university, and that having that resource was extremely helpful for building my resume, making sure the formatting was good and everything like that, as well as getting a lot of recommendations regarding my letter of intent. I applied to 5 externships, all in the state of Colorado, and all of them did follow the ACEN timeline. So if the externship that you're interested in is following that ACEN timeline, I would make sure to reach out to the program coordinator and confirm those dates. And if they are not following the ACEN timeline, I would make sure to fully understand their externship process or their application process, because each site may have different requirements or may follow different timelines. So definitely contact the extern placement and see what their requirements are.
So I'm just going to indicate what my experience was in applying for externships, just because at my school, our program is a 3-year program. Our timeline's different, and we had very different rules. So this might not be something you see often, but this is a possibility. So we had to do letters of recommendation and make a cover letter, like sort of a cover letter template, and get that approved with our professors. This was in the late part of our first year. So this was like April, May. We weren't allowed to start applying for externship sites till we got back for our second year, which began in late August. So that sort of sometimes could put us behind the 8 ball, because right when you get back in for your second year, you got to start applying for externships. But thankfully, over the summer, they will gather up ads for various externship sites, and you can see what requirements they have and what materials you need to gather. So sort of over your summer break or in the early parts of your second year, you gather up those materials, what letters of rec you have already saved, what type of cover letter you need, and then you present those to our externship coordinator, who is one of the professors, and then they would act as your liaison, talking back and forth for you to start you off. We weren't allowed to contact externship sites on our own. We sort of had to use the externship coordinator in order to get that communication facilitated. Then once they emailed you for an interview, now you're on your own, and then you just, carry the baton from there.
We also had a lot, sorry, Matt. We also had a lot of like support from our externship coordinator, but we could kind of flip back and forth of I might start it, our externship coordinator might as well, kind of depending on what seemed more preferred from sites. But one thing that we kind of started off with initially was where do you want to be and what do you want to get out of it? Because somebody who's really pediatrics heavy probably is not or should not aim more towards a VA as their first choice. And so I think kind of isolating it down to where do you want to be, what do you want to do is an important thing to think about.
Yeah, Brianna, that's really in line with what I was going to say. I mean, and also if you don't have any idea of like any specific specialty, you're really not sure, you still want to keep it really general, great. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to have some, clear idea in mind of what you want your early, career trajectory to look like. But one thing about in my program, I live in New York City, and I knew I wanted to stay in New York City, and I also knew that I definitely wanted to be able to work with cochlear implants, and so those were kind of my parameters. And also, I was blown away by how many externship sites don't pay, and so I was not willing to accept an externship site that did not pay a stipend. That's a whole nother discussion. It's very frustrating, but one thing, a couple people have mentioned the ACEN timeline, and I think it's a little bit better in New York this year, but in years past, it's been so stressful for students because everyone is on a different timeline. And last year, I was actually in a position where, I had done some research and kind of figured out, like, I know where I want to be. I know the sites in New York that I would be really very excited to be a part of. So I narrowed down my list and I had all my materials, and then the interview schedule and the interviews were spread out over a long period of time. I got an offer before I had like 4 interviews. And I ended up in a situation where I said no to every place that I had, from whom I received an offer, because I was still waiting to hear back from my number one choice. And it was like gut-wrenching. It was so stressful, and thankfully it worked out. But it is something to consider. And there are some people in my cohort who really weren't willing to do that. And they were like, all of the places where I've applied, I would feel really good about. And so I want to take the first one that gives me an offer. And I totally respect that. But yeah, it's so just be prepared that the timing of things can vary a lot, and it can be quite stressful. And I don't know, maybe we'll touch upon that more later in the discussion. But yeah, different parts of the country seem to do it a little differently in terms of timing. I know I had my first interview in like late June before my 3rd year, which is crazy. So yeah, anyways.
Okay, thank you so much for your wonderful insights. We'll now be starting our next topic, and I'll hand things over to Andrew.
Okay, our next topic is about navigating preceptor/student relationships. We have a few questions to get us started, but please continue submitting your questions in the Q&A feature. Our first question we have is, how do you navigate a mismatch between a preceptor's feedback style and how you like to receive feedback? I'm going to direct this one to Jure for starters.
So for me, this was sort of a sticking point throughout a big portion of my externship. I know that I needed to sort of have talks with various preceptors over the course of my externship and have meetings and tackle that issue head on of like, hey, here's what I'm after, here's what you're giving, and I don't believe we're on the same page, and sort of just not be afraid to stick up for yourself and how you feel you respond best to criticism. And also just being forthright about when you are unhappy, because the last thing you want to do is have an externship where you kind of resent showing up every single day. I know a lot of our preceptors say like, oh, it's only a year. A year is a long time if you're not happy. So what I would say is tackle that issue head on, and don't be afraid to, have a face-to-face with somebody and have a real conversation about it.
Thank you, Dre. Anybody else have any other comments on that one?
One thing we did for my externship that I've really enjoyed that has kind of worked well for me is I have a different preceptor pretty much for every day of the week. I'm constantly with somebody new, and with that being said, every single person has their own way of doing things. So we created like a little sheet of, okay, this is how we're gonna do this is why I'm doing this is why I'm doing that. And so that way, upon all of the preceptors, it's an agreed upon way of how I'm going to learn what I'm going to do. They can still do their own thing, but this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And that included like all of the different steps, the research supporting it, so that it would be evidence-based practice. And then everybody was happy. And that instead of having to be like, well, it's Monday, so I need to do it this way, it's Tuesday for that, it kind of just cut out some of that.
Thank you, Brianna. I know too, at my externship personally, I had 17 different preceptors throughout the years. So having very good communication and having really well set out and thought out clinical protocols that is given to you on day one of this is how the clinic does things. If the clinic doesn't have that, please ask them for that or help them create it. So it is in writing on how to do certain things, because that helps as well.
This might be contrary to what other people have said, but I really relied on my main preceptor for feedback. I thought it was most valuable coming from her. I felt like I could trust her the most. I didn't feel that with all of my preceptors. I would say pick your battles. I didn't need validation from 2 out of 9, but one was really important to me. So really keeping that tight bond with either your main or someone that you truly do trust. But if you don't need it, then it's okay.
Okay, next question we have here is sometimes preceptors may have you observe longer or be more independent than you are comfortable with. How can you effectively relay your skill level while being respectful of the preceptor and their teaching style? I'm going to direct this one to Madeline for starters.
Yeah, I think in terms of if you're feeling like you need a little bit more support, I mean, no specific strategy. There is no shame in asking for that and just letting people know where you're at. Everyone has different experiences, especially leading up to the 4th year. I mean, you're not in control of that, what what you've actually done clinically. So in terms of clinical skills, I wish I had like a better answer for that. But yeah, I mean, you should just really you should never hesitate to ask for more support when you need it. Even if it's something like, hey, I just wanted to check in. I want to make sure that I'm doing this in the most effective way, talking through your process or your workflow, or like, I'm realizing that I'm not getting it done as efficiently or as quickly as the time, allows. Could we check in about, what the best way to move forward would be? And then in terms of when you want a little bit more independence, I had a small moment of small experience with this a couple weeks ago where so I'm at a cochlear implant center, and so for pediatric cochlear implant maps or evaluations, or really any pediatric appointment, I was doing a lot of, as the second tester, I was in the booth with the patient. But I expressed to one of the audiologists, I love working with kids. I'm really looking forward to honing the skills on the mapping side of things. And she was like, "Oh, great. Okay, cool. Like if you're feeling up for it, like maybe next patient we have, like, why don't we trade spots?" And so I think sometimes there's a little bit of anxiety about just like asking outright, like, can I do X, Y, or Z? But kind of framing it as a goal or something that you're looking forward to strengthening, I think eased a little bit of the, tension for me, and was ultimately really well received.
going off of what Madeline said, I've had experiences in my current externship where one of my preceptors loved to jump in on the recommendations and follow-up piece after we were finished with testing, before I was able to provide my own follow-up and recommendations. So I had to have a talk with her and ask her if I was able to have more of that independence in that aspect of the appointment. So sometimes just having that one-on-one conversation and being open about the areas where you feel like you could have more independence or maybe have more support was really helpful for me. And the routine that me and my preceptors have kind of established is we'll look at the day or we'll look at the week and what patients we have on our schedule, and we'll talk about, okay, what area or what patient do I think that I would be able to have more independence with versus which patients do I think that I would be kind of more of the backseat driver or maybe be the test assist, and establishing those like expectations for the day or for the week has been really helpful for me, so I know what to expect.
Anybody else have anything else to add in regards to that one?
I could talk about my one experience that was honestly pretty negative. So I was thrown into an appointment and my preceptor walked out the door and said, "Baptism by fire." And at that moment I knew this is going to be rough. So after that experience where I felt like I didn't give the patient the best that I could have, this was a private practice, this is what the patient was looking for. Um, in my next, clinical experiences, I really framed it as patient-based. I would tell my preceptor, I am not going to do this correctly. I'm not going to give the patient a good experience. They're going to feel like a guinea pig, and that's not how they should feel. Because I didn't want to offend a preceptor or, elicit any comments similar to baptism by fire. So just making the patient the priority really helps.
Again, if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A feature. We'll have a little bit of time here at the end of this section to answer any of those as well live. But our next question we have is, if I'm struggling at an outplacement, what are resources available and who would you recommend to turn to? Jure, would you like, or Sierra, go ahead.
Sorry. The first person I would turn to if I was struggling would be my clinical director. They were a very open and welcoming individual in our program, and they were able to handle the conflict that I felt was out of my control, or if it was an area where I felt like it was something that I just needed that little extra support from someone outside of that clinical rotation. So if you have someone in your program, whether it's your clinical director or a professor that you're able to turn to let them know about what's going on, I feel like that would be an appropriate first step.
I mean, for me, I think that what Sierra just said about going back to your school and using some of those resources that are still there is really important, because even though you're on an externship, they still should be able to vouch for you and help you even over that distance that's going to be there. And so making sure that they are still in touch with you and you're saying like, hey, I'm struggling with this. Is there some help I can get? That might be a good way to, address the situation while getting assistance, while maybe not, showing your entire poker hand to your preceptors and then have them maybe look down on you a little bit. Not that that's guaranteed to happen, but that's a general fear that people may have. But yeah, that, and then also any sort of outside help. My hearing aid reps and my CI reps were actually pretty helpful in giving me a lot of information or a lot of like tips and tricks to make my appointments a little bit more streamlined. So that way, when I'm sitting down at the computer and I'm programming, first fitting, what have you, that part was a breeze, and I could at least show a lot of competence in that regard and make, some of the other aspects of the appointment my focus, because I know I had the computer stuff down in the bag.
I would also say if you're able to attend like the different manufacturer trainings, attend them, especially as like new releases happen, to be able to kind of get those up-to-date information on what's the product doing and what's new with it. One resource I really liked throughout was Audiology Online because pretty much if I had a question about it, there's an answer there.
Okay, it looks like we have a question in the Q&A. Have you had any experiences where you believe preceptors were not providing best practice or evidence-based practice? How did you navigate those conversations and with them, and with them if you did? Does anybody have an experience like that?
Unfortunately, yes, I do. Um, our my externship site was pretty divided on whether we believed, not we, whether it was believed that real ear, was helpful or not. I think the way I went about it was really not a judging tone, just trying to learn. Why do you not believe XYZ? Really just trying to learn more from their perspective, um, just to see where they're coming from, I think, and then, relying on what is evidence-based practice as well.
I had one clinics where I didn't have the best experience, and one of the advice that I would get was given was sometimes what you take away is what not to do as a clinician. And I think realizing that is okay too, of just because they do this doesn't mean I have to, and I can use that to kind of guide how I want to practice in the future.
And I can also speak to this too, because I think I had a similar experience as you, Alex, and also approached it in a similar manner. And I'll also say this came up for me when I was applying to externships as kind of one of my interview questions. It was something along the lines of what was a time when you and a preceptor, you and a professor like disagreed about something, and how did you approach that? So I think this is a really good question to also think about for any of you who might be going through that interview process. It also goes into a little bit more of that conflict resolution. How would you handle that discussion when you're taught to only do best practice, do real error as a student, but you see that people are doing that a little bit differently. So I would also think through just those of you watching it and going through interviews or will be going through interviews, I think this is a good question to think about as well.
Another thing important to adding on to that is just timing is everything for that conversation. Do not do it while a patient is in the room. Do it after an appointment or the end of the day. Don't try to upstage your preceptor that you are working with because it's not going to go well for you. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Do it end of the day, end of the appointment, or like when there's a small break so you can have that conversation without it being patient facing. Does anybody else have any other questions related to that? I've got one that I'm coming up with here. How have all of you navigated working with different preceptors? So say you have one preceptor that is strictly doing balance or something like that, and then you have another person that is strictly CIs. How do you manage the feedback from those preceptors, knowing that it's a completely different kind of world when it comes to audiology?
I can add my little tidbit. Last semester before I started my externship, I did a vestibular rotation in the hospital setting that I was at, and vestibular testing was a new experience for me. I studied up as much as I could to make sure that I felt prepared for going into that specific testing environment. However, there were times where my preceptor would ask me questions that I didn't know the answer to, or I would receive feedback on areas where I kind of blanked on what I was doing, or kind of interpreting the results, or writing the reports, things like that. So when I was doing that vestibular rotation, I was reminding myself that this is a very niche area of audiology, and it's not something that I have spent a lot of time in, especially as a student, even though I've taken a course on it and I've had a few labs in those specific areas. This person has had years and years of mounted experience on top of me. So it was just that divide between this person has so much experience and this is like my first rotation attempting vestibular testing. So I remember having an open conversation with my preceptor at the time that this is new to me, and even just little areas of feedback where, rather it being so specific to a specific piece of testing, more of like a global approach to feedback, in the way they were giving it to me, was something that was reciprocated well by them, and it was helpful for me to receive feedback in that kind of manner.
I was in a similar situation of I didn't have a ton of like vestib experience prior to my like final placement before leaving for my externship. And so one of the things that my preceptor at the time did was hand me a notebook and go, write down everything that we are about to do. And then you've got a step-by-step guide pretty much of what you need to do, what you're doing, how to interpret it. And to this day, I still carry that notebook in my white coat pocket so that if I need to just pull something out, quickly reference it, it's right there.
Another question, what kind of advice would you give a student going into their first placement on establishing that new relationship with a new preceptor that's not from the university?
I think being flexible and being open to new opportunities and growth is really important to kind of take in whatever you can and see what you get from that and how do you learn and grow from there.
Does anybody else have anything else to add to that one?
I think I would say just kind of flow with who they are. I feel like I've had a huge variety of preceptor personality and, dare I say, boundaries. Just kind of go with the flow, but also remember like what is professional, what you wouldn't want relayed back to the school. But also be comfortable with them because you will be spending time with them. You will be receiving feedback. Really do what you got to do to establish a good baseline between the two of y'all, but generally keep it professional, or try to.
Okay. Next question we have is, what strategies can you employ to maintain your well-being and preventing burnout during demanding clinical rotations, especially when facing challenges with preceptors or the learning environment? I'll direct this one to Allison.
I think it's really important to rely on those going through it with you. So, relying on your cohort and sharing your experiences, but also finding time outside of class to gather and just relax and also enjoy grad school. I think some of the times that I felt the most relief from some of the struggles with clinic and placements and preceptors was through just spending time with those that were going through the exact same thing with the same people.
I definitely had times where, especially early on in the AUD program, did not super duper well talk with my cohort. And so there were times where I thought I was going through things on my own and later on realized I'm not. Other people are relating to these same difficulties. And I think once I kind of made that connection of I'm not on my own, I have the support and community here. If I need it, I can reach out, and any single one of those people would have helped me at any given point. One thing that also really kind of worked well for me, which came through a trial and error, was setting a schedule that worked for me. And so for me, I wouldn't work past a certain hour. I am a morning person, so I pushed all of my work to be in the morning and afternoon. And so come the evening, I had my evenings to be able to do what I wanted. And that kind of helped clear and give myself priorities of how to schedule my day as well.
Something that has helped me in the past and still serves me now is during days where I am just seeing patients back to back and the only break I'm getting is my 30-minute lunch, is I take some of that time to get outside if the weather's nice, take a walk, get some stretches in, or maybe get myself a little sweet treat or a coffee in the afternoon, because having those little moments throughout my day has been helpful, just kind of building up my resiliency, because I know if I'm having a rough day, I can take that 5 to 10 minutes for myself and just reground myself so that way I can go into my afternoon or the rest of my day with a better mindset.
I know for me, to avoid burnout, especially over longer stretches of time, I always wanted just to have something on the calendar to look forward to. One of the things that I did, every now and then was I'd attend conferences, just because, hey, it's still audiology, you still learn something, but you're not necessarily under the guise of your externship site. You get to be independent, you represent yourself. And that, to me, getting away from that externship for a little bit was really, really helpful. Getting to, talk about what's been going on with, some of my friends and see them come from around the country, that was really, really good too. And so, yeah, just having that beacon on the calendar helped me not lose my mind when I was in the, mire of my externship in the middle of January.
Do we have any more questions that people have been thinking of that just haven't quite got typed through yet? I'll give it a little bit of time. Otherwise, we will move on to our next section here. I'll give it a little bit, about 30 seconds or so.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and then, let's see. Okay, so we can go ahead and address, there was one more question that came in, and then we'll move into our final topic. So do you all recommend conferences for students? I guess third years in particular. I'll say yes to all years. I'm sure a lot of people here have been to conferences. I know I've seen many of you at conferences, but if anyone else wants to address this further, please go ahead.
I have attended and presented at multiple conferences, and they have all been very welcoming and supportive of students. And I think it's a great opportunity to kind of go in and network, but also learn more about things that you might not necessarily learn about in the classroom as well.
I would say too, when I used to think of conferences, I used to think ASHA and AAA. Even just your state level conferences are very impactful to go with your cohort or go with some people in your cohort and get to know some of the audiologists and those working, whether it's in your city and your state. Those state conferences have been super impactful.
Yeah, definitely. You never know where conference interactions will lead. I've been very fortunate to be a part of planning the SAA conference and the student-led sessions at AAA, and Alex was also a big part of that. on the programs committee last year, so we knew each other going into this webinar from that experience. Also, as part of the T35 program, which I think we might talk about in a little bit, I was able to do a poster session at the American Auditory Society conference this past year, and someone came up and started talking with me, and it was a researcher that I really was really inspired by, and he's based at NYU, and now I spend one day of my externship per week in his lab doing research with him, and it really did, our conversation was really jump started at a conference. And so you never know where those connections will lead. And not that it's all about, networking, but, the audiology world is small, much smaller than we think. So I am very pro conference and pro networking in person and meeting up in person whenever possible.
And with that, Madeline, I think that was a really great segue into our next section. So for our final topic, we're going to discuss how to apply for and find non-traditional clinical experiences. So just like you all have been doing, if you have any questions about this, please put them in the Q&A and we will address them. So since you mentioned T35, Madeline, we have a few of us here who have done them. So for those of you who did a T35, did you feel like you lost any clinical skills or missed out on experiences from doing a summer of research?
Just to quickly define what T35 is, in case anyone who is listening is like, what in the world? T35 is an NIH grant that funds a 3-month research traineeship specifically for AUD students. And it's really cool because there's a lot more research opportunities, at least I found, for PhD students, but this one is really focused toward learning about research and specifically for the AUDs. But there are 3 sites across the country: Vanderbilt University, Boys Town National Research Hospital, and NCRAR, which is National Center for Rehabilitative Auditory Research, which is associated with the Portland, Oregon VA. So if you're an AUD student who's interested in research, then it's a great opportunity. And I think Brianna and I were T35s both last summer, and Lindy, you did one as well, I believe, the year before. So I did not feel like I lost out on any clinical opportunities. I feel like if anything, it really cemented my desire to move forward with cochlear implants. I spent a summer in Renee Gifford's lab at Vanderbilt University, and it was great because Vanderbilt is a major medical center, so I could observe clinically, which was great in addition to the research that I was learning about. I also found that it was a great strength to my CV for 4th year applications. I know a couple of my professors were like, just be careful because you don't want to make 4th year placements think that you're only interested in research and don't want to work clinically. But in my experience, it was quite the opposite. And I feel like it really was such a tremendous experience, and I gained so much from it. And I did not feel like it set me back clinically.
I also don't feel like it set me back clinically. If anything, I might have come back a little rusty for like the first 2 or 3 weeks. But once you're going back routinely doing things, they come back. It just becomes like a secondhand nature sort of situation. And I loved the experience I got. It kind of further developed the fact that research is an area that I want to progress more so into. I did my T35 in Portland, Oregon, where we went to cancer patients on the oncology floor in the Portland VA, working directly with them. And that was an area that I absolutely loved and was a unique experience that I got to talk to throughout my like externship interviews that kind of set apart, I feel like. And then when it comes to those externship interviews, there were definitely some places that were like, why you have a bunch of research experience, why are you applying for like 100% clinical experience? And having a reason for that was definitely an important part. But I think places also respected the fact that these are things I did, this was important, but I also want to be able to get a well-rounded clinical experience out of the externship.
Yeah, and then I'll just really echo what you both said. You know, I didn't feel like I lost out on clinic. I did it at the end of my first year. So I was really nervous coming into second year, but yep, maybe for a week I was a little rusty, but you know, you really jump back into the swing of things. And for me, it solidified that I wanted to pursue a PhD. So I am a dual AUD PhD student. So if anyone's interested in research, as an AUD student, this is one of the best opportunities that you can have. So I highly encourage people to apply, even as a first year, because you just never know what'll happen unless you apply. So with that, I'll go ahead and move on to our next question for our panelists. So for those of you who did, I know some of you here did out-of-state summer placements, either second year or third year. So when should you start looking for either non-traditional or out-of-state summer rotations?
I started looking into mine probably spring of my first year, and I intended to do it summer following my second year. So I actually just completed it. So I would encourage you to start early because sometimes it takes a while for the university that you're at and the clinical placement that you're going to kind of form their relationship and fill out any necessary paperwork. It also takes a while to make sure that the preceptors are willing to take you and get all of those kinks worked out as well. So the most time that you can leave, the better.
Perfect. And then did anyone have any other out-of-state placements, either maybe not in the summer, but other parts of the year? Okay. No worries. So let me go ahead, and there was a question in the Q&A, so I'll go ahead and ask this question. So someone mentioned asked, it sounds like paid externships are non-traditional and few and far between. What recommendations would you have for students who are relying on paid experiences? So just to kind of give a little bit of clarification on this, for externships, there are many that are paid. Not every single one of them is paid, and that does kind of depend where you're located. That might mean, based on location, that some are more likely to be paid or less likely to be paid. So there are plenty of paid externships out there, but yeah, I'll let our panelists answer, you know, what recommendations you would have for students who are relying on paid experiences.
I wouldn't necessarily say they're far and few between. There is definitely plenty of them out there. I don't think anybody in my cohort took an unpaid externship, and I know I didn't apply to any that were unpaid. So I think kind of figuring out your priorities of what do you want, but also keeping in mind cost of living. Living somewhere in LA, California, is going to cost you more than, say, Kansas. You know, especially depending on where you're from, if keeping in mind those moving expenses and cost of that. But I think a lot of the places now put the fact that they offer a stipend in their initial listing, so keeping an eye on that, I think, is important.
If you're someone that's prioritizing being paid, totally valid. I wish I read my externship description and realized that I was not going to be paid. So make sure you read it, but just make sure that you ignore the people that discredit paid externships. Again, my placement doesn't pay and they're kind of on their high horse about it. Don't let that discourage you. It's fine to prioritize money and quality of your own life. It does not make you less of an audiology student or less of an audiologist.
I think too, being open and honest about the conversation during the interview process and asking those questions on if this is a paid internship or externship, if it's not listed on the job description, is definitely a very appropriate question to ask. And my current externship does not pay me a full salary, but they do pay me in specific aspects. So there were other externships that I applied to as well, where they would offer stipends or they would offer scholarship opportunities. So definitely ask those questions, even if it's not clearly laid out in the description and you want to get more information. It might not be a full salary or paid throughout the year, but they may offer stipends or scholarships or other ways that you can get paid.
I think also going off of that, if you know conferences are a priority for you, which definitely they are for me, something to ask about is, especially for those of you going through that process, ask if they have funds for you to go to conferences. Is it required for you to present at those conferences to receive those funds? Can you go just as an attendee? And is there a limit? So, those are also some more questions to consider as well, because they may or may not pay you. But yep, just like Sierra said, there's other avenues that you might explore as well. Does anyone else have anything to add for this question?
What I would say is that I only applied to one externship site that did not offer a stipend. And especially if you're in a position where you really rely on that money, where it's like, I can't really make ends meet without it. I don't think you need to be shy or ashamed or fearful about having that need, because even as an extern, I know we've spent a lot of time talking about, how to be professional in sort of this subordinate role or this adjunct role to your preceptors, but you do have value. You are not coming in skillless. You've been going to school for 2 or 3 years. You do have a certain level of expertise and you're trying to learn more, but you do have something to the table that you are bringing, and that does have value. So in that same effort, you can get paid for it, and you don't have to be ashamed about it, because you are a net plus to the clinic overall.
Absolutely. And with that, showcasing your value, I think that is a great segue into our next question. How did you make your resume competitive when applying to your externship? So let's see, Madeline, do you want to start us off with this?
Yeah, this was actually something I was going to see if I could. There's no way I'm going to find my resume right now. But so because I had a gap of time in between undergrad and grad school, my first draft of my resume that I submitted to my program director, she was like, I don't know if you meant to, but you kind of made it look like you did nothing for 8 years, And I was a live sound engineer. I was on concert tours mixing sound, and it's actually, served me really, really well in terms of, working with sound in this application. So I really tried to kind of synthesize, what I've done, where I'm at now, and what I hope to do. And so I didn't want to spend a bulk of my resume talking about what I did. I didn't want to make it too long. I wanted to keep it succinct, but I was given the advice to, like, at the top of it, it sounded so corny to me at first, but like a one-liner just describing, who you are in a sentence. And it doesn't have to be like, I am so passionate about this, it's like what you're interested in, I'm trying to find what it was, because it really did, yeah, I'm not going to find it, but it was like keep making like a one-liner for myself at the top that I felt like explained a lot about, what I used to do and what I'm interested in now, and where I hope to go. it just covered a lot. It encompassed a lot in one sentence. I also think that really just like having it organized and spell checked and formatted neatly goes such a long way. In terms of resumes and cover letters, I'm sure your programs have great resources for you to submit them to, but I believe SAA still does have a resume service where you can send your documents and get feedback from a professional in the field. And sometimes it's kind of nice to have someone who doesn't know you at all, like on a personal level, take a look at it. I think that can be beneficial too, because no assumptions are made, or they can't really fill in any gaps that aren't on that document there. Yeah, sorry, I'm rambling a lot here, but yeah, all of those things I think helped me.
Going off of that, if you are in the process of applying for externships and you are very interested in a very specific population, so for example, I am and was very interested in the pediatric population, I made sure to highlight everything and anything that I did in the past that was related to pediatrics. So if I had really good experience with VRA or CPA testing, I made sure to put that I had experience in that specific realm, or with speech testing for kiddos, or running I'm blanking. I am so sorry. RECDs, taking RECD measures. I made sure to really highlight that stuff. So wherever you are going in the specific areas that you're interested, I would make sure to really emphasize on your resume that you have previous experience or interest in that area.
And to add on to that, I'm really interested in research, but I applied to places that were research heavy, but also places that were 100% clinical. And when I was applying to places that were 100% clinical, I kind of condensed some of that research down. I didn't highlight as much of the presentations and publications that I have versus when I was doing my research placements, and just kind of figuring out what does the person who is looking at that resume going to think is important, and what do they want to be able to see and get it quickly, because they're not going to sit there and read 3 pages of things that might not be relevant to them at all. But also to add on to the fact of the earlier you get involved. I mean, overall, that's going to help add on to the resume of, if you're kind of putting everything together last minute that last semester, it's going to be harder to kind of get a diverse CV.
All right, well, I will ask one more question before we start wrapping things up. So one more question for all of you is, how can audiology students effectively network and build professional connections to enhance their chances of securing desirable externships or internships? Let's see, Alex, why don't you start us off?
I would say be as social as you can, even if that's with just your professors or preceptors at school. Just taking the time to say, hey, as they're walking down the hall, just so they have your name, because just like Madeline said, audiology is really small, and knowing a name that someone can think of right off the bat is going to be super important. I'm kind of anti-LinkedIn, even though mine is fully updated, but I think it's good to have just in case, that you can add, people in the area that you're looking to apply for, or just someone that seems really cool in the field. Totally fine to add them. And again, I'm pro conferences, even if it feels like networking with students isn't going to be as valuable. It totally is. Meeting Madeline gave me the best experience at AAA. Then that's just my humble opinion. So make sure you're social with everybody, not just people who you think will be important. Air quotes.
I will also say, again, conferences I think are really important, but I was roommates with one of the girls during my T35, and it was really interesting to kind of see how different programs work a little bit differently and kind of have their own kind of style. And getting that involvement helped me be able to see that. But also having those different skill sets of I can kind of grow from here, and she was able to learn things from me as well.
One thing I would like to add too is make a digital business card. There's a couple apps out there, but one that I've used in the past is called Hi Hello. It allows you to get your contact information in one place that you can share either a QR code or you can send it as a text. That way it's set and ready to go. You don't have to go look for paper if your school is able to make those for you or make your own. It's digital, it's free. All the other person would have to do is just sign up after they scan the QR code, and then you can share your contact information that way. It's a really easy way to get in contact with people in the future.
All right, and with that, we just have a few minutes left. So I'm gonna actually go around and direct this question to each of our panelists. So I'll have everyone formulate an answer. So what is a final piece of advice that you would give to our audience? So I'll just go in order of who I see on my screen. Dre, I'm gonna start off with you.
What I would say is that just be aware of the experience you have at school and the experience you will first have at clinic, especially on your first internships when you're first starting to get out there. It's going to be, pretty different from what you're used to, and just be able to roll with those punches and just realize that, like, hey, school is one thing, clinic is another, and just be aware that there's a little bit of time to negotiate, the textbook knowledge to practical skills, and don't sweat it too much.
Okay, I'll move along, Sierra, and then anyone else jump in after.
One piece of advice that I could give is, as an extern, there is a lot of pressure to gain independence and to be able to do so many things and really hone in on your skills. But I still rely on my clinical binder, and I still rely on just chatting with people in my cohort and chatting with professors and everyone. So I always remind myself that I'm still a student and this is still a learning process for me. I'm not a practicing clinician yet. I will be soon, but right now I am still a student, and this field is such an ever-growing field, and there's constantly something to learn. So just the piece of advice I could give is to be kind to yourself and just give yourself the grace to know that this is a process, and your first day or first week of externship, you're not going to have all that independence, and there's going to be possibly a big learning curve. So just remind yourself that you're still a student and you still have so many people that you can lean back on if needed.
I would say lean into what your interests are. If there's an area of audiology that's really interesting to you and you're not getting some of the clinical experiences relating to that in some of your placements, I would ask for different, or if there's somewhere else you can go to get that experience, because you never know if you don't ask, and sometimes it ends up working out really well and you fall into a placement that you really love, and you get to explore that interest. So.
If I could go back, I would kind of tell myself it's okay to not be perfect, especially on day one. You are still a student, and it's important to be able to kind of learn from your mistakes. Those mistakes are where I kind of feel like I've learned the most from. And just kind of learning how to be resilient, pick yourself back up after those mistakes, and kind of gather from there.
One thing I would add about the application process for the fourth year is that there's no one perfect site, and it's really, really easy to get your heart set on, one place in particular. I mean, I certainly did, but there's so much to be gained from different placements. So just keep an open mind. There's several people in the cohort below me who are all applying to the place where I currently am, and I just see the sheer panic, they feel right now. And understand the feeling so deeply, and I think being a few months into it now, I mean, I have had such a wonderful experience so far, and I'm so grateful for that. But I really do feel like all of the places that I applied to, I think they would have been great. So, you know, there's not one single place that is the right or the only place for you.
I think I'd say that what you do matters, and I mean that in both a positive and a negative sense. So being involved in, the community and the field is great, and it's stepping stones. It'll be things that you'll talk about in interviews, with your future coworkers, but also remember that again, audiology is small and your reputation does matter. So yes, mistakes are okay, but just keep things in mind as you move through the world of audiology. I'd hate for anything negative to happen.
All right, so I think that concludes our final topic. So I'll turn it back over to Allison to wrap things up for us.
Awesome. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for giving us their time and just their advice over all things audiology. We're going to put up a slide real quick. And if you'd like to connect with any of our panelists further, you can take a screenshot and feel free to reach out to them. This conversation also has been recorded and it'll be shared on our social media accounts. So it'd be great to reference or to share with some of your friends. But thank you so much for taking your time to listen and attend tonight. I hope you learned something new. And we hope you have a really good rest of the evening. Thank you, everyone.